"A cowboy found his ex-wife's sister at his gate," she said. "I came to forgive you both." John McAllister had always been a man of the land. The ranch where he lived had been in his family for generations, and though it wasn't large or flashy, it was enough. Rolling pastures stretched out as far as the eye could see, dotted with sturdy fences, grazing horses, and the occasional patch of wildflowers that swayed gently in the wind. John loved the quiet life, the rhythm of the days dictated by the rising and setting sun, the gentle neighing of his horses, and the soft rustle of wind through the tall grasses. After a lifetime filled with busy towns, people's expectations, and the heartbreak of a failed marriage, he had found comfort in this solitude. Here, the world seemed simpler, and he could breathe without the weight of judgment pressing down on him. He woke early every morning, often before the sun had fully appeared over the horizon. The crisp morning air would fill his lungs as he stepped outside, brushing off the dust of sleep. The horses would stir at the sound of his boots against the wooden floorboards of the stable, their hooves clattering softly on the ground as they anticipated the morning feeding. John moved among them with practiced ease, feeding and grooming, speaking softly as if to calm them and himself at the same time. In these quiet hours, his thoughts often wandered to the past, though he tried not to dwell on them. The memories of Mary, his ex-wife, lingered in small ways. The way she used to laugh when the sun hit her face just right, the arguments that had seemed so enormous at the time, and the day she walked away. The ranch had become his escape, a place where he could forget, if only for a while, the mistakes he had made and the regrets he carried with him like stones in his pockets. It was one of those mornings when the sky was painted in pale oranges and soft pinks that he first noticed the figure at the gate. At first, he thought it might be a traveler, lost or seeking help, as the road to his ranch wasn't traveled often. But as he walked closer, brushing hay from his hands, he realized there was something familiar about her. The figure was a woman, standing tall, with a calm but determined posture. Her hair caught the sunlight, glinting in shades of gold and brown, and her eyes held a warmth that was immediately comforting yet carried a depth of emotion that made John pause. He didn't recognize her at first, but there was a sense of connection he couldn't ignore. The woman lifted her hand slightly in greeting, and John instinctively felt his chest tighten. Her voice was calm, measured, yet full of purpose as she spoke the words that would stop him in his tracks. "I came to forgive you both." For a moment, John couldn't move. His mind raced, trying to understand what she meant. Forgive. He had lived with guilt for so long that he had almost forgotten what peace felt like. Memories of his failed marriage surged up, the arguments, the silence, the heartbreak. He thought of Mary, of their fights that never seemed to reach a resolution, of promises broken and dreams abandoned. And now here stood her sister, someone he had known vaguely but never truly understood, standing at his gate, speaking words that he had longed to hear yet never expected. "Anna?" he asked finally, his voice breaking slightly, betraying the mix of surprise and emotion he tried to hide. The name felt strange on his tongue, almost foreign yet familiar. She nodded gently, offering a small smile that didn't quite hide the weariness in her eyes. She explained that she had come from a nearby town, that she had traveled quite a distance to reach him, and that this visit had been long overdue. As she spoke, John felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. He was anxious because he didn't know what to expect, and relief because the tension that had built inside him over the years seemed to shift slightly. There was a possibility here, a chance to confront the past in a way he hadn't allowed himself before. They stood there for a long moment in silence, the morning light spilling over the ranch, casting long shadows across the ground. The horses watched quietly, their soft eyes reflecting the peaceful yet tense atmosphere. The wind carried a gentle whisper through the trees and over the fields, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for the first words of conversation to break the quiet. Finally, Anna spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. She explained why she had come. After Mary and John had separated, she had watched quietly, observing how the separation had affected both of them. She had seen the pain, the regrets, and the way each of them had tried to cope with the absence of the other. She admitted that she had once held feelings of resentment, not just toward John, but toward life itself for the way things had unfolded. Yet over time, she realized that carrying anger and bitterness only made life heavier, and that forgiveness was something she needed to find for herself as much as for them. John listened intently, absorbing every word. It was the first time in years that someone had spoken about the past with such honesty, without blame or accusation. Anna's words were not just about forgiving him. They were about acknowledging the pain, the mistakes, and the lessons learned. It was about recognizing the humanity in all of them, and understanding that life often took unexpected turns that no one could have predicted. As the conversation continued, John began to see Anna not just as Mary's sister, but as a person who had her own journey, her own struggles, and her own capacity for understanding and compassion. She shared stories of her life since the divorce, of the challenges she had faced, and of the moments when she had felt overwhelmed by the weight of the past. Through her words, John realized that forgiveness wasn't just an abstract concept. It was an active choice, a conscious decision to let go of the anger and pain that had held them captive for so long. Time seemed to slow as they talked, the early morning stretching into late morning. The ranch, usually so quiet, seemed to hum with the energy of their conversation. John felt a strange sense of relief, as if a burden he had carried alone for years was finally being shared. He began to speak of his own experiences, of the regrets that had haunted him, and of the ways he had tried to make amends, even in small, imperfect ways. Anna listened with patience and empathy, never interrupting, allowing him the space to express feelings he had long kept hidden. By the time the sun was high in the sky, John felt a shift within himself. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had been acknowledged, named, and faced in a way that felt safe and genuine. Anna's presence had brought clarity, a reminder that the past did not have to define the future, and that forgiveness was possible even after years of hurt and misunderstanding. Before she left, Anna and John stood together for a long moment, looking out over the fields, the horses grazing peacefully in the distance. There was a sense of connection, a silent understanding that had been forged through honesty and vulnerability. Anna promised that she would visit again, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to continue the process of healing and reconciliation. John nodded, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. As she walked back to her vehicle, John watched her go, the dust rising in small clouds around her boots. He felt a strange mixture of emotions, gratitude, relief, and a quiet determination to live differently, to embrace the lessons of the past without letting them dictate his present. The morning had started like any other, but it ended with the realization that life had a way of bringing the unexpected, and that sometimes the most profound changes began with a single act of courage and forgiveness. John returned to his routine, tending to the horses and the ranch, but something inside him had shifted. The visit had reminded him that connections, even those strained or broken, could be repaired, not necessarily to return to what once was, but to create something new, something stronger. And though the memory of Mary and the heartbreak of the past remained, he felt lighter, freer, and more prepared to face the days ahead with an open heart. The quiet of the ranch, once a sanctuary from life, had now become a place of reflection, growth, and healing. John realized that sometimes the most important journeys were not those that took you across vast distances, but those that led you inward to confront your own heart and the hearts of those around you. And as the sun set over the rolling fields, casting a golden glow over the stables and pastures, John felt a sense of peace he had not known in years, a peace born not from solitude, but from the unexpected arrival of someone willing to forgive and help him see the past in a new light. After the surprising visit, John couldn't stop thinking about Anna's words. "I came to forgive you both." They echoed in his mind, filling the quiet spaces of his daily life with questions he had long avoided. The ranch had always been his escape, a place where he could work with his hands and let the world fade away. But now, even the familiar tasks felt different. Every sound, every movement seemed to carry a memory, a reminder of the past he had tried to leave behind. He found himself walking the fields in the evenings, staring at the horizon, trying to make sense of what forgiveness meant and why Anna had come all this way. The next morning, as the sun began to climb over the hills, John prepared the ranch for the day. He fed the horses, brushed their coats and mended fences, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Mary, his ex-wife, and the life they had shared before it all fell apart. He remembered how they used to ride together across these very fields, laughing as the wind whipped past them, how they had shared dreams about building a future that now felt impossible to reach. The separation had been painful, leaving behind scars he still carried, and he realized that those scars had shaped not just his life, but the lives of those around him as well. Anna's visit had opened a door he hadn't expected to find. He knew she had witnessed the pain of the past, not just his, but Mary's as well. Anna's calm and understanding manner made him reflect on how little he really knew about the struggles his ex-wife had faced after their separation. He had assumed she was managing fine, but Anna's words hinted at a story he had never fully understood. The idea that someone he barely knew had taken the time to observe, to care, and to seek reconciliation made him both humbled and curious. He realized that he had never considered forgiveness from someone else's perspective, and that it could be a powerful act, not only for the person being forgiven, but also for the one offering it. Later that day, John decided to write a letter to Anna, though he wasn't sure if he would send it. He wanted to express what he felt, the mix of guilt, relief, and hope that had been stirred by her visit. He wrote about the long nights of regret, the times he had wished he could go back and change the past, and the ways he had tried to move forward despite the pain. He wrote about the ranch, the horses, and the quiet beauty of the life he had built, and he ended the letter by thanking her for her courage and honesty. Writing the words made him feel lighter, as if each sentence released a small piece of the burden he had carried for years. When Anna returned a few days later, John was surprised at how natural it felt to welcome her onto the ranch. The tension that had gripped him during the first visit had softened, replaced by a sense of curiosity and readiness to confront the past more deeply. They walked together across the fields, the early morning light casting long shadows over the grass. Anna spoke of her own journey, of the anger and hurt she had felt after the divorce, and how she had realized that holding onto those feelings only caused more pain. She described the moments when she had been tempted to judge John harshly, and how she had chosen instead to seek understanding. John listened carefully, absorbing every word. He began to see not just the pain of the past, but also the strength it took to forgive and move forward. Anna's perspective gave him a new way to look at his own mistakes, not as failures that defined him, but as lessons that had helped him grow. She shared stories of her own life, the challenges she had faced, and the moments of doubt and fear that had tested her. John realized that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of blame. It was about recognizing the humanity in everyone involved, including himself. As they spent more time together, John and Anna began to talk about Mary in ways they never had before. Anna spoke gently about her sister's struggles, the loneliness she had felt, and the difficulty of moving on from a marriage that had ended painfully. John admitted that he had often felt guilty for the impact their separation had on Mary, but he had never fully understood the depth of her feelings. Together, They pieced together fragments of the past, sharing memories both painful and comforting. The conversation was not easy. It required honesty and courage. But with each story they shared, a new understanding formed between them, a bridge over the years of silence and misunderstanding. One afternoon, they decided to take the old trail along the river that ran near the ranch. It was a place John had not visited in years, a place filled with memories of laughter and arguments, of dreams once held tightly and then let go. As they walked, the sound of water flowing over rocks and the chirping of birds created a peaceful background for their conversation. Anna spoke of the moments when she had wished she could reach out sooner, the times she had felt powerless to change the past, and how she had finally realized that forgiveness was a gift she could give, not just to them, but to herself. John felt a shift inside him. The weight of guilt and regret, which had once felt like an anchor, began to loosen. He realized that he had spent so many years trying to make amends in ways that often went unnoticed, and yet he had never taken the time to truly confront the emotions that lingered. Anna's visit was more than a gesture of kindness. It was a catalyst for self-reflection, a mirror held up to his own heart, showing him the areas where he had held onto pain unnecessarily. As they returned to the ranch, John felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years. The chores that once felt like routine now had a new meaning. Each task was a reminder of life continuing, of the possibility for healing and growth. Anna's presence had brought a perspective he had never considered, that the past could be acknowledged without being a source of constant suffering, and that forgiveness could be a starting point for a better future. In the following days, their conversations continued. They spoke of small things, memories of childhood, the quirks of the horses, the beauty of the changing seasons, as well as deeper topics, regrets, choices, and the lessons learned from mistakes. John found himself opening up in ways he had not with anyone in years. Anna listened without judgment, offering insights and observations that were gentle yet profound. She encouraged him to reflect on his own growth, to recognize the strength he had gained from surviving hardships, and to understand that mistakes did not define him as a person. Through these conversations, John began to see a path forward. Forgiveness, he realized, was not a single act but a process. It required patience, reflection, and the courage to face difficult emotions head-on. It also required humility, the willingness to admit faults and accept that others had their own struggles and perspectives. Anna's visit was teaching him that reconciliation, even if it did not restore the past, could create a sense of peace and understanding that made life richer and more meaningful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the ranch, John and Anna sat together on the porch of the old farmhouse. They watched the horses grazing in the distance, the air filled with the gentle sounds of nature settling for the night. Anna spoke of her own fears and doubts, of the moments when she had questioned whether it was even possible to forgive fully. John shared his own vulnerabilities, admitting how much he had carried silently for years. In that quiet space, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of the ranch, they found a rare kind of connection, one built on honesty, empathy, and the shared desire to let go of the burdens of the past. By the end of her visit, John felt changed. He had learned that the past could be faced without fear, that forgiveness was a powerful tool for healing, and that human connections, even when strained or broken, could be mended through understanding and compassion. Anna's presence had reminded him that life was not only about surviving hardships, but also about learning from them and growing stronger. He realized that the mistakes of yesterday did not have to dictate the possibilities of tomorrow. As Anna prepared to leave, she and John stood once more at the gate. There was no awkwardness, no lingering tension, only a quiet sense of gratitude and understanding. She thanked him for welcoming her, for listening, and for being willing to reflect on the past. John, in turn, thanked her for her courage, her honesty, and the gift of perspective she had brought into his life. With a warm smile and a final wave, she walked away, leaving John standing at the gate, feeling lighter than he had in years. That night, as he sat alone on the porch watching the stars twinkle in the vast sky above, John thought about the lessons he had learned. Forgiveness was not easy, and it was not a one-time act, but it was possible. It was a choice, a conscious decision to release anger and resentment, and to embrace understanding and compassion. He realized that life was full of second chances, not necessarily to fix what had been broken, but to learn, grow, and move forward with a sense of peace. In the days that followed, John noticed subtle changes in himself. He felt more patient, more reflective, and more willing to engage with the world around him. The chores on the ranch became opportunities for mindfulness, and the interactions with the horses, neighbors, and the land itself felt richer and more meaningful. Anna's visit had planted a seed, a reminder that even the smallest gestures of courage and forgiveness could have a profound impact on the lives of others. In the days that followed Anna's visit, John found himself reflecting more deeply than he ever had before. Her words continued to linger in his mind, echoing in quiet moments when he worked in the stables, fed the horses, or walked through the fields. "I came to forgive you both." It was a phrase that seemed simple at first, yet carried a depth that John could feel in his bones. He realized that forgiveness was not just about absolving past mistakes. It was about understanding, compassion, and the willingness to see people beyond the errors they had made. And in Anna's presence, he began to understand that some wounds could begin to heal, even if the past itself could not be changed. Anna had stayed for several days, and during that time, John and she spent more hours together than he had shared with anyone in a long time. Each morning began with chores and the care of the horses, but the evenings became moments for conversation. They would sit on the old wooden porch, sipping coffee as the sun slowly sank behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The air was quiet, except for the occasional whinny of a horse or the gentle rustling of leaves. It was in this quiet that they could speak freely, sharing thoughts and feelings that had long remained unspoken. Anna often spoke about Mary, her sister, with a gentle honesty that surprised John. She described the struggles Mary had faced after their divorce, the loneliness, the uncertainty, and the weight of trying to rebuild a life that had once seemed secure. Anna's words were not judgmental. They were filled with understanding and a desire to see the whole truth of the situation. John listened carefully, realizing that he had never fully considered the impact of his decisions on those around him. He had carried his own guilt for years, yet he had failed to see the full picture, the emotional journey Mary and even Anna had endured. John shared his own side of the story, recounting the mistakes he had made, the arguments that had seemed endless, and the regrets that had followed him long after the marriage ended. He admitted the moments when he had felt helpless, unsure of how to make things right, and how that helplessness had often turned into frustration and sorrow. Anna listened without interrupting, nodding gently, offering him the space to speak without fear of judgment. Her patience and empathy created an environment where John could reflect honestly, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his guilt begin to lift. As the days passed, their conversations began to touch on memories of the past, not just the painful ones, but the moments of joy and warmth they had shared with Mary. They recalled summer days spent riding horses along the river, evenings sitting by the fireplace, and times of laughter that had seemed infinite at the time. John found that remembering these moments brought a bittersweet comfort. The past was not erased, but it could be acknowledged and honored. Anna shared her own recollections, adding details and perspectives he had never considered, painting a fuller picture of the life they had all shared together. One afternoon, Anna suggested they revisit the river where John, Mary, and she had spent time in the past. It was a place filled with memories of carefree days, of challenges faced and overcome, and of the bond they had once shared as a family. As they walked along the riverbank, the soft sound of water flowing over rocks and the occasional chirp of a bird created a soothing backdrop. Anna spoke of the lessons she had learned about forgiveness, about letting go of anger, and about finding peace within oneself. She explained that forgiveness was not about forgetting the past or excusing mistakes. It was about freeing the heart from the burden of resentment. John listened intently, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that his anger and guilt had not only affected him, but had also shaped his relationships with others, keeping him isolated in his ranch and his own thoughts. Anna's perspective showed him that healing required courage, not just the courage to admit mistakes, but the courage to face emotions that were difficult and uncomfortable. By walking through these memories with Anna, he began to see how interconnected their experiences had been, and how important it was to acknowledge the emotions that had long been buried. As they sat on a fallen log by the river, Anna asked John to speak about his hopes for the future. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he had the right to hope after so many years of regret. But Anna encouraged him gently, reminding him that the past did not have to dictate what came next. John began to share his thoughts, speaking of dreams he had set aside, of the kind of life he wanted to lead, and of the relationships he hoped to rebuild. Anna listened carefully, offering insights and encouragement, helping him see that his desire for a better future was not only possible but necessary for his own growth. Over the next few days, their routine became a balance of work, reflection, and storytelling. They repaired fences, tended to the horses, and prepared the fields for the coming season, all while sharing stories that revealed their thoughts, fears, and dreams. The physical labor of the ranch became a metaphor for the emotional work they were doing together. Just as the fences were mended and the fields prepared for new growth, John and Anna were rebuilding understanding, trust, and connection. During these moments, John realized that forgiveness was not a one-time event, but a process that required patience, reflection, and openness. It was about understanding the full scope of human emotion, including the ways in which people hurt and are hurt in return. Anna's presence made it clear that forgiveness could not be forced, but it could be nurtured through empathy, honesty, and consistent effort. He saw that by facing the past openly, he could create space for healing, not only for himself but for those he had affected. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Anna and John sat quietly on the porch, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch at night. Anna spoke about the importance of perspective, how sometimes stepping back and seeing the bigger picture allowed for clarity and understanding that was otherwise impossible. She encouraged John to consider not just his own experiences, but also the experiences of those around him, to see the world through a lens of compassion rather than judgment. John reflected on this deeply, realizing that many of his resentments and regrets had been fueled by a narrow focus on his own suffering, without fully considering the struggles of others. As their conversations continued, John began to notice subtle changes in himself. He felt lighter, more reflective, and more capable of embracing the present rather than being trapped by the past. Anna's visit was teaching him that healing was a journey, one that required courage, empathy, and a willingness to confront emotions honestly. He realized that the mistakes of yesterday did not have to define who he was today, and that forgiveness could create a foundation for a better future. They spent another day tending the fields, planting seeds for the coming season. As they worked side by side, they spoke about the cycles of life, the way challenges could be followed by growth, the way mistakes could teach valuable lessons, and the way human connections could be strengthened through understanding and care. Anna reminded John that forgiveness was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to strength and wisdom. John felt a sense of clarity he had not experienced in years, understanding that the past could coexist with hope for the future. By the end of her stay, John and Anna had formed a bond built on honesty, empathy, and shared reflection. They had revisited memories both painful and joyful, explored emotions that had long been buried, and found ways to release burdens that had held them captive for too long. John realized that this connection was a gift, one that had allowed him to see the past in a new light and to approach the future with renewed courage. As Anna prepared to leave, they stood together once more at the gate, looking out over the fields that had been silent witnesses to so many moments of their lives. She smiled, a calm and understanding expression that conveyed both compassion and strength. "Remember," she said softly, "forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Carry it with you and let it guide the choices you make." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. He watched her walk down the dirt road, the dust rising gently around her boots, and felt a sense of gratitude that was difficult to put into words. That night, John sat on the porch of the farmhouse, gazing at the stars that stretched endlessly across the sky. He reflected on everything Anna had said and done, on the conversations they had shared, and on the emotional work they had undertaken together. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. The past, with all its mistakes and regrets, no longer felt like a chain around his neck. Instead, it was a series of lessons that had led him to this moment of clarity and understanding. In the following weeks, John began to integrate the lessons he had learned into his daily life. He approached his work on the ranch with renewed focus, tending to the horses and the fields with care and attention. He reached out to neighbors and friends he had drifted away from, reconnecting and strengthening relationships that had been neglected. The emotional growth he experienced during Anna's visit became a guiding principle for how he lived each day, reminding him that forgiveness, understanding, and compassion were not abstract ideas, but practical tools for a meaningful life. The visit had taught him that healing required courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the past without fear. It had shown him that human connections, even when strained or broken, could be mended through patience, empathy, and reflection. And most importantly, it had reminded him that life was not only about surviving hardships, but about learning, growing, and moving forward with a sense of peace and purpose. John often thought of Anna's words, carrying them like a quiet mantra in his mind. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. They reminded him that the process of healing was ongoing, that it required daily effort, and that it could transform not only his life but the lives of those around him. He realized that by embracing forgiveness and understanding, he could create a future that was not defined by past mistakes, but enriched by the lessons they had taught him. After Anna's departure, John McAllister felt the ranch in a new way. The fields, the horses, and even the farmhouse seemed brighter, almost alive, as if the land itself had sensed the changes within him. The quietness that had once been his comfort now felt like a space for reflection, growth, and hope. Each morning, he rose with renewed purpose, the sun casting golden light over the pastures as he went about his chores. Feeding the horses, mending fences, and walking along the trails that threaded through the hills were no longer just tasks. They were reminders that life was moving forward, and he could move with it. John reflected often on the lessons Anna had shared. Her words about forgiveness and understanding had not been simple advice. They had been a guide to living differently. She had taught him that forgiving someone, or being forgiven, did not erase mistakes or pain, but it transformed them into something meaningful. It gave the heart freedom and allowed the mind to rest. For John, this realization began to shape how he approached every day. When he encountered challenges on the ranch, he no longer felt defeated. When memories of the past arose, they no longer paralyzed him. Instead, he could observe them, learn from them, and continue moving forward. One evening, after a long day tending to the horses and repairing fences, John walked to the river that ran along the edge of the ranch. The water glistened under the setting sun, reflecting the sky's shades of pink, orange, and purple. It was the same river where he and Anna had walked together days earlier, revisiting memories and sharing reflections. This time, he went alone, but he felt her presence in the lessons she had left with him. Sitting on the familiar rocks by the riverbank, he thought about the journey he had been on, not just the physical labor of the ranch, but the emotional work of understanding, forgiving, and growing. He realized that Anna's visit had not only helped him heal from past mistakes, but had also inspired him to become a better person, not only for himself, but for those around him. As the weeks passed, John began to reconnect with people in ways he hadn't in years. He reached out to neighbors he had grown distant from, sharing meals, helping with tasks, and simply talking. These interactions, once awkward or tense, now felt natural. He listened more and judged less, remembering Anna's advice about seeing the world through a lens of empathy. Even small gestures, like lending a hand to a neighbor fixing a fence or sharing some of his harvest, became moments of connection that reminded him of the value of human relationships. Through these simple acts, John began to rebuild not just his relationships, but also a sense of belonging and community. One day, while working in the barn, John found himself thinking about Mary, his ex-wife. The memories were no longer painful. They were reflective and full of understanding. He thought about the struggles she must have faced after their separation and realized how much he had misunderstood her emotions. Though they were no longer together, he felt a sense of compassion and respect for the life she was building for herself. He understood now that forgiveness did not require reconciliation in every situation, but it did require acceptance, empathy, and the courage to release the bitterness that had lingered for so long. John also began to write again, something he had stopped doing during the years of sorrow and isolation. He filled pages with reflections, letters, and thoughts, sometimes addressed to Anna, sometimes to Mary, and sometimes just to himself. Writing became a way to organize his emotions, to track his progress, and to acknowledge both his growth and the work that still lay ahead. He found comfort in the rhythm of pen on paper, realizing that articulating his feelings helped him understand them more fully. On another morning, as the sun rose over the ranch, John decided to take a walk to the old barn where he kept some of Mary's things from the past. It was a place filled with memories, a reminder of the life they had once shared. He touched the objects gently, remembering the happy times without dwelling on the mistakes. In that quiet reflection, he understood that the past had shaped him, but it no longer controlled him. He could honor those memories while living fully in the present. This balance, he realized, was one of the greatest gifts of forgiveness, the ability to remember without being bound by pain. John also thought often of Anna and her courage. She had traveled miles to find closure, not just for herself but for him and Mary as well. Her actions had shown him the true meaning of empathy and bravery. He felt grateful not only for her words, but also for her willingness to face the past and create understanding. Even though she had returned to her own life, her presence continued to influence his actions, thoughts, and choices. Her visit had sparked a transformation, guiding him toward a life filled with reflection, kindness, and intentional living. Over time, John noticed how much the horses seemed to respond to his calm and reflective demeanor. They moved with a gentle ease, trusting in his hands and presence. Working with them reminded him of the trust and patience required in human relationships. Just as he had learned to approach the past with care and understanding, he approached the animals with attentiveness and respect. Every moment of connection with them was a reminder of the lessons he had learned about patience, care, and consistency. John also took steps to improve the ranch itself. He repaired old fences, cleared overgrown paths, and tended to the fields with renewed dedication. These tasks, once simple labor, now carried a deeper meaning. They symbolized the effort needed to rebuild not just the ranch but his own life. Each nail hammered, each fence mended, and each seed planted was a small act of hope and renewal, a way of moving forward with intention and care. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch after a long day of work, John thought about the journey he had taken over the past few months. Anna's visit had been the catalyst, but the real work had been his own, the courage to reflect, to forgive, and to let go of the heavy burdens he had carried. He understood now that forgiveness was not a single moment but a continuous practice, requiring effort, attention, and humility. And in embracing it, he had found a sense of freedom that he had never known before. As the days turned into weeks, John continued to experience moments of growth and reflection. He began planning small gatherings on the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends to share meals and stories. These gatherings, simple yet meaningful, became a way to celebrate connection and community. They reminded him that life was not meant to be lived in isolation, and that the bonds we form with others can bring healing, joy, and understanding. One evening, as the sky turned shades of violet and gold, John found himself at the river again. The water reflected the fading light, creating a serene and peaceful scene. He thought about the journey he had been on, from the pain of a broken marriage to the unexpected visit of Anna, and finally to the transformation he was experiencing now. He realized that healing required facing the past, acknowledging mistakes, and embracing forgiveness. It required courage, reflection, and a willingness to act with empathy and understanding. And in doing so, it opened the door to a life filled with meaning, connection, and hope. John also began to consider the future in ways he hadn't before. He thought about his goals, the kind of person he wanted to be, and the relationships he wanted to nurture. He understood that the lessons of the past could guide him, but they did not have to limit him. By approaching life with a mindset of growth and understanding, he could create a future shaped by intentional choices rather than lingering regrets. This realization gave him a sense of empowerment and freedom, inspiring him to live more fully and thoughtfully. In the quiet moments, John often thought of Anna's final words before she left. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination." He reflected on how true this was. Forgiveness was ongoing, requiring attention, patience, and compassion. It was a practice he could carry into every interaction, every decision, and every relationship. And by embracing it, he found not only peace within himself, but also a new sense of purpose in the world around him. As the season changed and the ranch shifted with the rhythms of nature, John continued to grow. He cultivated not only the land but also his inner self, learning to balance reflection with action, memory with hope, and forgiveness with understanding. The ranch became a symbol of this growth, a place where the past could be honored without holding power, and where the present could be embraced with intention and gratitude. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, John felt a deep sense of contentment. He walked through the fields, breathing in the crisp air, and observed the horses grazing peacefully. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers, and the sounds of nature filled the air. In that moment, he felt fully present, connected to the land, the animals, and the lessons he had learned. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that he had the tools, the mindset, and the courage to face them with grace and understanding. John understood now that the past, no matter how painful, had shaped him into someone capable of growth, reflection, and empathy. He had learned the power of forgiveness, the importance of human connection, and the value of facing emotions honestly. And in embracing these lessons, he had discovered a sense of freedom and peace that would guide him for the rest of his life. The ranch, once merely a place of solitude, had become a sanctuary of growth, understanding, and hope. John McAllister, The quiet cowboy who had once carried the weight of regret alone now stood ready to face life with a heart open to forgiveness, a mind willing to learn, and a spirit prepared to embrace the future. And though Anna had returned to her own life, the gift of her visit, the lessons, the reflection, and the courage remained with him, guiding every step he took on the path ahead.